Hey there fellow creators, Ben here from Cinderblock Studios, and for this week's video I've got a little bit of a special treat because I'm going to be going over every single color of acrylic paint that I have. At least for the most part. I have a couple that it's not sort of my regular set, but everything that you're going to see here today is part of my regular set of colors. Now, this video is going to be a little bit long because I have, on my regular set of colors, 16 heavy bodies, 6 open colors, 10 high flows, and 10 inks. Now, that's a lot of different colors of paint, and definitely way more than most people would ever need. But I like picking up different colors and playing with different colors and changing them on my palette every few years. So this video is going to be a little longer than you might normally expect from me for a video with just demoing color. But in order to really encompass everything that I want to do, I kind of have to show everything. Now for my fellow color nerds out there, I will actually be listing the pigment and color information for each of these tubes down just below the screen at the bottom. I'll put some text here or something like that. But I'm just going to try and run through these colors actually as quickly as I possibly can, at least within reason, just because it's going to take me some time to go through all of them. Also, brand-wise, you're primarily going to be seeing some golden acrylics. There's some Utrecht ones in here, as well as a handful of Liquitex, but we'll just, call those out as we go along. So the first color on my palette is red oxide, sometimes referred to as Venetian red or iron oxide red. It is a highly opaque and very strong tinting color. And I love this one in particular because it's great for mixing specifically browns and sort of gray tones, especially when you start mixing them with blues. It's not the best for glazes just because it's so opaque, but again, it's generally a really fun mixing color. Next one up is my go-to red, which is Golden CP Cadmium Red Medium, and it's a pure cadmium red. It's not a mix, it's not a cadmium-free paint, it's the real deal cadmium red medium. It's a go-to, it's a nice bright primary red. I love the color, it's been on my palette for years, and I really don't have a ton to say about it. Mix it with the right green and you've got yourself a perfect brown. That's really about it. Next up is Indian Yellow Hue. I picked this color up mostly because a friend of mine had it and she let me try it, and then I fell in love with it. Not simply because of its solid mass tone, but because it has this rich, warm, beautiful glaze, which is absolutely perfect for working with natural colors, foliage, and that kind of thing. Really kind of helps bring a lot of great warmth to a lot of more natural, again, foliage, trees, grass, anything in sort of the natural world that I do. I also love glazing it to get different colors of light. Really versatile color for just all around. My yellow is actually in a jar rather than a tube. It's a Utrecht Cad Yellow Medium Pure, again like my red. It's the real deal cadmium, no cadmium freeze here in my studio. And just, again, go-to, simple, nice, opaque yellow. Perfect for any applications. I actually use it not only to mix my natural colors for trees and grass and stuff, but I love using it for skies. It's really great for that as well. Next up, we have what I have come to call my rotational green, because it seems to change every 2 or 3 years. Originally, I had a phthalo green on my palette, then I had a hooker's green for a while. More recently, I had a chromium oxide green, and when that tube was gone, I ended up picking up this color, Terra Vert Hue. Now, I actually have not used this color a ton yet, just because I just finished up my, I had actually a tube of Viridian, I think, prior to this, now that I'm thinking about it, which is a very bright emerald green. This is a lot more muted, a lot more transparent, and I think it's going to be a really fun color for glazes, but again, I haven't really played with it a ton yet. I do believe it mixes considerably well with the Indian yellow, as long as I have them both out. We'll go ahead and give that a quick push around. You get kind of a nice green gold out of that. My second green is a staple, I think, for many artists, and that's Sap Green Hue. Nice, simple, middle of the road. Leans a little more opaque than a lot of other greens, I think, but if I need just like a quick shortcut green, this is definitely my way to go. It's pretty much right out of the tube. It's pretty much perfect for a lot of tree stuff. But I tend to mix it either with a blue or a yellow in either direction, just to kind of give myself a little bit more complexity. Next up, we enter the world of blues. Now, blues for artists I find to be rather interesting because a lot of artists tend to collect blues in a lot of ways. Now, I've got 4 on my palette, but I've seen artists, I think, work with upwards of 6 or 7, and some that only work with 1 or 2. I think the biggest difference is whether or not you consider a color like teal to be blue, or whether you're strictly going with a more primary kind of color. So the first of these is Cobalt Blue Pure. Now for my Cobalt Blue, I actually specifically go for the Utrecht one, and that's mostly just due to cost. It's a couple dollars cheaper than the Golden or the Liquitex, so it just ends up making things a little bit easier on my wallet. But this is a nice, beautiful primary blue, leans a little bit warmer, and has some nice subtle glazes underneath. Not crazy in terms of the glaze, I mean it's still very simple, but if I need just a regular straight primary blue, especially when I'm mixing with my yellow or red, that's going to give me my really a true primary straight across the board. Next up is a color that I tried in college and kind of fell in love with. This particular one, specifically from Liquitex, is their Prussian Blue hue. Now a lot of companies, including Golden and Utrecht, have Prussian Blues, but I actually really like Liquitex's Prussian Blue better. I think they use a purple, while Golden might use a phthalo or something in it. I'm not really sure what the actual difference is. It's like one slightly color difference than the others. I specifically love Prussian Blue for dark skies, night skies, as well as stormy skies. You can get a really nice mix with the Prussian and some white to give you a more dynamic range for some more muted colors of blues for skies. Next up is another one that I prefer in the Utrecht line, and that's Cerulean Blue Chromium Pure. Now what's interesting about Utrecht's Cerulean Blue versus Golden's, and I actually have both, because last time I bought one I had bought a Cerulean, and then I switched back to the Utrecht, is the mass tone straight out of the tube is really similar. And they mix identically, so I will note that if you're getting one versus the other, the way they mix is exactly the same. But straight out of the tube, the Utrecht one is slightly greener. And I do actually prefer that, having that on my palette, because a lot of times I am using straight out of the tube color in addition to mixes. And so for that reason, I actually love using the Cerulean mixed with some Prussian to give myself a rich tone for when I actually am making that nice brilliant blue sky. Now my fourth and final blue, at least in the heavy body line, is a color specific to Golden called Smalt Hue. And Smalt is interesting because it's a very low tinting and very transparent blue, but I find that it's, in a lot of ways, my secret weapon for creating shadows. Because it is so transparent, you don't really get the mass tone, you just get that undertone. And if you're perhaps going over top of a section you already painted, you can really do some really cool things with just glazing that color on to pull certain colors back and even sort of kick them back a little bit in terms of your value. And that's really great and really valuable to me. Next up is another sort of secret weapon color for me, and that's Golden's Quinacridone Magenta. I specifically want to note that I'm using Golden's Quinacridone Magenta because there are other paint companies that make Quinacridone Magenta, but they're not the right pigment. I do have the pigment again listed on the bottom of the screen, but I will note verbally that it's PR122. The reason why you need to note that is because if you get a different quinacridone, it mixes slightly differently. This color, it's a similar level of transparency to the Smalt or even the Indian Yellow, but it's also very high tinting. And the reason why this is sort of a secret weapon color for me is because if you add just a little bit of yellow, you get a brilliant orange, or if you add just a little bit of blue, really any blue, you get a nice violet color. And that's really sort of the color I use to get that range between, like, I don't have an orange in my heavy body set because I have the Quinacridone Magenta. I don't have a violet because I have the Quinacridone Magenta. I can do both with one color. Next up is the land of the whites. I have technically 3 whites. 4 if you include my hands, but that's a joke for another day, I suppose. Titanium buff, Titan buff, or unbleached titanium, depending on the brand you go for. Nice sort of off-white, a little bit of a cream color. tends to be good for mixing natural highlights to things. So whether that be flesh tones, foliage tones, light tones cascading onto rocks. I've been using a lot for that over the past few years. It's a lot, it's not as bright as a regular pure titanium white, and for that reason I love using it to just kick up maybe some greens so it doesn't get minty. So for example, excuse me, if I grab a little of that sap green and mix that into it, rather than being a bright minty green, it's a lot more toned down, and I really, really enjoy that about that color. Now my next two whites I'm not going to show out on the page here today, just because they're white on white doesn't make a lot of sense to show. But I will point them out, and that's zinc white. Zinc white is really, really great, specifically because it's a very transparent white. I use it for waterfalls, water lines, water effects in general, tweaking some things with clouds, distant clouds, getting stuff like that right, as well as some lighting effects and glazed whites over towards the end of a piece. Also, my tutorial on how to paint mist and fog utilizes this. I don't use it a ton anymore, but if you paint like an entire section in your background, you're like, that should have been lighter, you can actually just go over top of it with a zinc white and just kick it back a little bit further with a layer of mist, which is it's really valuable for that. My white, this is actually interesting because it's, while it is titanium white, it is technically a lower quality. This is similar to what you might get out of a student grade paint because it's a medium body rather than a heavy body, but it's also still very thick. I use it like a heavy body, and I use a lot of white, so I get the pint jar for it. After that, we get our black. Now, I used to have black in a jar. I ended up getting it in a tube, although I screwed my tube up and the cap doesn't sit on there right. And my black of choice is a Mars black. Now the reason why I go with Mars black versus other types of black, at least in terms of my heavy body, is that it is a very matte color. Ivory black is another very popular one, but ivory black is shiny. It dries to a very shiny coat. And if I'm doing mixed media work, I don't necessarily need that shine. So I like having a nice matte black finish, so that's specifically why I use Mars black versus ivory black. And the last color might be hard to call this a color. It's sort of a specialty paint, and that is permanent silver, because it's not really its own color. It's I think a white or a black or both, and then mixed with I think mica particles to give it the shimmer. I added this recently to my palette, and I use it really sparingly for just a handful of projects. But it's really fun, captures some extra light, and for special effects it's really perfect. Okay, so next up we've got my golden open colors. Open's a really interesting line of paint. It's a slow drying acrylic, but cleans up with soap and water, but does a similar effect to what you might get out of the glazing effect you get out of oils. And I love having these on the palette just to expand my color set and extend my drying time here and there when I need to. So the first one of these colors is alizarin crimson hue. Now of all the colors that I may replace a red with on my heavy body line, it would be their alizarin crimson hue. A great mass tone on this color, as well as just a brilliant rich undertone in that glaze. I love using this as a mixing color, specifically late in my painting process, specifically to get slightly more complex areas of color, perhaps mixing some of this into a shadow color or something of that nature. When I was building this set of my open colors, I wanted basically to work with a more limited palette. So I needed a red, a yellow, and a blue, basically. The alizarin crimson is sort of my extra red. But my red I decided to go with is some Pearl Red Dark. Pearl Red's a fairly expensive color in and of itself, but I saw the dark line at some point, or the dark variation at some point, and I was like, this is actually really interesting. It has a slightly, I don't know, cleaner color to it. It's a little bit, I think it leans almost towards the violet side. It's a little bit cooler of a red, specifically than the cadmium, but even towards its Pearl Red, the regular Pearl Red counterpart. I think this one actually leans a little bit, again, towards the violet side, and I really like that about it, because it makes it a more versatile color, regardless. It's also very, very opaque, which is nice to have in a red. My yellow, I went with fairly newly formulated color, as you could say, at least in the past 10 years, and that's benzimidazolone yellow light. Benzimidazolone yellow, or just Benz yellow for short, is a Really great comparable color to like a Hansa yellow. It's a little bit cooler of a yellow than a Hansa yellow, but still really great, and makes, again, for a great mixing color, which is why I have a lot of the opens in the first place. My blue for the open is a phthalo blue green shade. Now, I actually used to have this color on my heavy body line, and after a while I started to miss it. Not enough to put it back on the heavy body line, but I wanted to have it in, one of my alternate color lines, just to have it, again, just an extra mixing color. To me, phthalo blue, look, there's nothing better than a phthalo blue for a blue sky, and sometimes I will pull that out to use it for a blue sky, even mixing it with one of my other blues just to kind of tone the color down a little bit, because phthalo blue is very, very intense. But again, I love having it. It's a fantastic, versatile color for mixing, as well as a great color for skies. As before, I'm not going to lay down the white on the page. I'm just going to talk about it. Again, titanium white, base standard. I think I have a titanium white at least across the board on all my viscosity lines. So, really important. Just have again, basic mixing white. No need to put that down because you're not going to see anything anyway. And the last of my opens is Bone Black. Bone Black's very, very similar to Mars Black in that it is very, very matte, similar to the Mars Black, but the Bone Black is actually a little bit more transparent, making it, again, a more versatile color for mixing, as well as glazes, too. Okay, next we move up to my Liquitex acrylic inks. Now, these I actually decided to drip down on the page ahead of time just to save us some extra time with taking caps on and off and things like that. Now, my Liquitex acrylic inks, I really love these. This is the way they used to look. And then these are the newer sort of redesigned packages, in case you were wondering. But if I'm using these, it's usually strictly for drawing or mixed media purposes. Occasionally I'll grab a color, again, for diversity and mixing with my heavy bodies. But for the most part, I'm using them pretty much straight out of the bottle on different projects like that, which is why I have such a wider range of color for these. So first one up is actually a color match to the red oxide. It's just another version of the red oxide, a little bit lighter, a little bit thinner. Naphtha Crimson is my red. Very comparable to a traditional Pearl Red, again the cousin of the Pearl Red Dark. A little bit bluer of a red than the cadmium. Next one up is Vivid Red Orange. At some point I was just like, you know what, I need an orange that's thin and it's easy, and that's why I picked that up, because also that was their only orange. Now the yellow, this particular yellow is actually a cadmium yellow, but it's technically a fake Liquitex cadmium yellow because I made it out of old Utrecht cadmium yellow paint. I think the original Liquitex ink one that I had was a cadmium hue. This one actually is a pure cadmium, which sucks because I don't remember how I made it, so it's going to be a thing to figure out later. Next one up, Yellow Medium Azo. Nice bright yellow. Similar, I would say it's kind of in the middle of the cadmium and the benzimidazoline, so it's kind of nice, versatile, middle of the road, a little bit cooler of a yellow. First of two blues is a cerulean blue hue. What's the difference versus the chromium and the hue? The hue is made actually mostly with the phthalo blue and some white, but it's very, very similar and mixes sort of similar. But again, I'm using these usually more purely than mixing with them. Prussian blue hue, again, this is the same color as this, slightly different viscosity. Grab it for its versatility above everything else, for the most part. Sap green hue, slightly different than this one. This one's a lot springier. And we have a couple of colors that are sort of specific to the Liquitex line, muted green and muted violet. This is actually, I think both of them just mix black into a phthalo, and then actually that's a quinacridone, similar to the golden one up here. But yeah, really interesting colors, give you a nice little bit of a range. A couple colors I never had with this were actually regular black and white. I just have the chromatics for this, so really, really fun to work with them. Again, usually for mixed media projects and usually just on their own. Alright, now my golden high flows. They come in varying bottle sizes. This is a 4 ounce, there's 1 ounces, and I think there's 8 ounce bottles as well. They're really big. Again, these are versatile in between mixing colors. Occasionally I'll use them straight out of the bottle. Actually, a lot of times I do. But some of them are glazing colors, some of them are just mixing colors. I use them for a lot of different things and a lot of different applications, not just canvas painting though. First up, we have a color match to the Golden Open, and that is just, well, they're all golden pretty much at this point, and that is the Alizarin Crimson Hue. Nice, brilliant, great color for glazes. You heard that ramble from before. Same color. First yellow is dialeride yellow. Similar to cadmium, nice, bright, vibrant. It definitely leans on the warmer side. And then on the cooler side, we have a Henza Yellow Medium. I actually used to have Henza Yellow Medium on my heavy body line. I eventually got rid of it, but I love having it in high flow again for that versatility and mixing and being able to go back to that color here and there when I need it. Now, when the Vivid Red Orange from the Liquitex line wasn't quite what I was looking for, I went to seek out a different orange, and that's when I found the Parole Red Orange, or Parole Orange, not Parole Red Orange. Bright, vibrant. As far as orange goes, like when you picture orange in your head, that's the orange you're thinking of. And I love having that. I don't use it a ton. I just tend, sometimes it's like, you know what, I need just like an orange, and that's why I have that. Next one up, we have Quinacridone Nickel Azo Gold. Doesn't look like much just sitting on its own, but as soon as you glaze out with it, that's where that color really kind of shows its true colors, I guess you could say. Fantastic, fantastic, fantastic finishing kind of color. If I just need a little bit of extra something in a piece, a little extra finesse right at the end, a lot of times I'm grabbing that color. Last blue to talk about today is Indigo or Anthraquinone. Very dark, but also glazes out to a nice vibrant reddish blue. Similar to Prussian, but it doesn't gray out quite the same way that Prussian does. Carbon black this time versus a Mars or Ivory or whatever. It's a little bit glossier than a Mars black, and for a high flow, very, very, very opaque. I love doing this for graphical work. This is another sort of finishing color for me, because I'll grab that in my liner brush and be able to get these just beautiful, rich little details in a piece, as well as a lot of times I use to sign my name at the end. So really good color for that. I'll use it to edge pieces, do black edges on like wood panels and stuff like that, as well as filling my paint marker, which is also why I have Neutral Gray 5. This color exists pretty much solely to fill my paint marker, although I am working on a piece right now where I'm using a white, black, and a gray, and that gray helps for middle-of-the-road mixing for some stuff in that grayscale painting. Now, as before, I do have a titanium white, as I do in, again, most of my other color lines. Versatile color, you have paint, you need white for usually most viscosities. The inks, in my case, no, but I consider these very similar to the inks because very liquid viscosity regardless. Don't need to show it, white on white doesn't show up, but again, titanium white, nice, simple, easy. And the last one, just added this recently, it's the same titanium buff from up here, again, just a little bit more liquidy. I bought that for the same reason I was just talking about the black, in order to get some final details in my pieces, just a little bit easier. So that's my lineup of acrylic colors. And I know that probably seems like a lot. It is, actually. It's probably way more than I ever need, ever. But I love playing with color, I love playing with new colors, I love adding colors, getting rid of colors. Actually, I don't really like getting rid of colors, but sometimes it's like, I don't really use this one anymore, I don't really need it. But what's interesting about this is, that's just acrylics. I didn't even talk about gouache or watercolor or oils, I have a lot of those too. So if you're interested in seeing some of that, let me know in comments below. Also, I have acrylic mediums that I didn't talk about. There's like 15 of those. So if you enjoyed this little trip through my color palette, go ahead and hit that like button. Let me know what you thought in comments below, as well as what your particular color palette is. Maybe you're using a color that I've never even heard of, and I would love to try it, or just maybe just kind of see what it is. Or try it, or get addicted to it. Who knows? That's why I do this kind of stuff, is to introduce you guys to new colors you may not know about, and hey, maybe you can do the same for me. So, as always, if you enjoyed this, hit that like button, get subscribed if not already. Social links for me are in the description box below. This has been from Snipit Studios. Keep on creating, and I'll see you guys next time. So I've got a little bit of a cold right now. So I do apologize if my voice is a little raspier than usual. Or maybe it's the coronavirus. Run!